Okay, so this is a cast-on bonnet. Right now there's no knitting on the machine, and you have to start it somehow. There's a lot of different ways. I learned with a cast-on bonnet, and I pretty well stuck with that. So this is just knitted here, regular sock yarn. Up here is cotton, and I have pulled up the beginning loops. These were picots that you can make when you're doing the knitting on the machine. And I pulled up those picots, and I'm going to hang these loops now, the picot loops, on every other needle on here. That's all I'll need to do to be able to start.
And what does the 64 represent?
The 64 is, this is a 64 cylinder, so there's 64 slots in here, so 64 needles.
Okay.
Okay, I also have a 54, and I have a 72. The 72 obviously makes larger socks, and the 54 makes smaller ones, or other things that I knit too. Okay. So I'm going to take and start inserting down through here, and I take my pick tool and take a loop and drop it over a needle, every other needle. And I will do that all the way around. And I'm looking to make sure all my needle latches are open. It's a constant duty when you're sock knitting on this machine. There are other brands of machines out there. This is an Erlbacher Gearhart Speedster. When they first made them, you could only get them in red. And my sock machine's name is Ruby. And I got her in the, I think 2014. Let me look at my plate over here. It's on there somewhere. 2014, yep. Okay, so I've hung as many loops as I can. These needles are down below level here, so I'll have to do a little cranking before I can get to those. And I have my yarn, my waste yarn fed through the yarn carrier. I'm holding the sock, pulling it down, or the cast-on bonnet is what it's called. And that's okay, it dropped a few, that's all right. We're just setting up right now. So now I'm going to take these extra loops that I couldn't get to before and hang them on these needles that have popped up. And now it can go around. So it hasn't knit every single stitch. In fact, this one it missed, so I must have had a closed latch. Yep, I can feel that latch is closed. I open it this time, it'll knit. But it has left a loop of yarn on the needles that it didn't knit, except for that one. And that loop will now start acting like a regular knitting yarn. So all I'm looking for now is every needle knitting. As I look around, even that one that was a problem before, it's knitting. Okay. All right. Okay, what you're looking at now is my little supply of ravel cord. Machine knitters know about it, but it's a way to separate one section of knitting from another very easily, and I'll show you. It's basically just a braided fishing line. So, and that's where I bought it. It was Walmart. I'm looking here. I have a piece of ravel cord in here. This is waste yarn up here. This is my project. And right in here is my ravel cord, and I would like to remove that. So I'm going to take and pull it. So now that my, you ready? Now that my ravel cord is out, set that over here, I can separate my waste yarn from my project yarn, and if it's knit in one, then I'll usually just chop it off unless it's an easy one to get out. This one I think might be easy, but if not, no, it's not. So I will just cut the waste yarn, of course. Every once in a while it snags up a waste yarn loop, but generally not. And there's the top of my sock.
That won't unravel.
No. It's all looped in there. Even if you can't even unravel it from here. Okay. trying to get these ribber needles out so that I can go all the way to all knitting. So I have to put in my knitting or cylinder needle. Oops. And then I take this ribber needle and I push it out a little ways, and the yarn that was on there has pushed the latch open. Now I lift up the ribber needle right over top of the new cylinder needle I just put in, and as I pull it back, that yarn now closes the latch and the ribber needle just slides out.
Wow.
And that's what I do with all of these. I know it's not easy to see. So I have 5 more ribber needles to take out, and before I can take them out, I need to put in a cylinder needle that corresponds with each of them. Alright, so I make sure all my latches are open. Now I'm going to take one ribber needle at a time, push it out so that I can pull, we call those the butt end. And there's no light for you to see.
We got plenty of light.
Ah, well we did. Messed that up. So I lift the ribber needle up so that the loop of yarn that's on that needle can slip over the cylinder needle that I just put in that slot. And then the yarn pushes the latch closed and the ribber needle slips right out.
And we're doing this because you're not going to do ribbing anymore on your sock. You're going to do regular knitting, correct?
Correct. This is the last one. Okay. So, all right. Now that I've taken all the ribber stitches or needles out, I'm going to take the ribber apparatus off. So I loosen this up so it comes out. And what I'm going to look for now is, did I drop any stitches? So here we go. I'll lift it up.
All right, Aileen, what are we doing now?
Well, I just finished all the ribbing. We have our little doohickey here we'll have to fix later. And I'm going to now just knit 15 rows of what we call pre-heel. And that just kind of smooths out the knitting so you don't have like this ribbing, because you can feel that. You don't feel that if we do the pre-heel, you don't have this ribbing right around the ankle and the heel. So there's less abrasion on your skin, as well as less wear and tear on your sock. So,
And what did you adjust up on the top?
so up here on the mast, this is how I knit normally. Okay, it just runs through this little bit of a tensioning. But this is weighted, and it's called this heel spring. And that keeps a weight, a little bit more tension on here. And not only does it do more tension, but in a little bit when you see me going back and forth, you can do back and forth knitting, because that'll keep it tight enough that you don't drop stitches. But first we got to do pre-heel, 15 rows.
And I see your counter was set to 0, so we're counting again.
Yep.
What a helpful item.
Now what's happening, see the yarn is riding up the needles. My sock weight is getting very close to the floor. 15 done. Okay, so we're getting ready to do the heel next. I had to take and move my weights. So this is a waist yarn here, but this is the top of my sock. So I'm putting this on now. This is a buckle, all right, and it has these serrated edge here, which will bite into this yarn to keep it from slipping off. And I'm going to put some weight on there in a minute. So I insert the buckle.
Why do you need the weight?
If I don't have weight pulling down the yarn from the inside here, all these stitches will just kind of ride up the needles and they'll drop. And you'll be ruined. Ruined, I say.
Now we have the weight on.
Okay, the weights are on. And now I need to set up the top of the machine for doing the heel. First thing I need to do is take this out.
What's that?
It's a dime.
It's a dime.
And it keeps this little triangular piece from making a clacking noise. As you move around when you're cranking, that hits every single needle. It's just like when you walked in school with a pencil against the lockers. That's what that one does. And it's just annoying. So I put the dime in there and it just makes it better. All right, now the heel is only going to work on about half of the needles. So I need to raise some of them up. When the needles are in the up position, they're called out of work. They do not knit. So I'm going to raise, I like a little bit deeper heel than just half of my needles. So here's my halfway mark on this side. So I'm going to go 2 over and using, this is called a crescent tool. I pull up those needles. Now I'm looking for my mark on the halfway point over here, counting in 2 in that same direction. And I'm going to raise these needles up. And again, once they're up, they're not going to knit. Here's a sock that's recently come off of the sock knitting machine. And I started up here, and this is up here 1 by 1 ribbing for 20 rows. Then I switched out and got rid of some of those ribber needles and put in cylinder needles so that it develops a 3 by 1 ribbing now. And there's other patterns you can do. This is the one I use the most as it fits with the configuration I have with a 64 cylinder. And so I do 60 rows of the 3 by 1 ribbing. And then I take out that 3 by 1 ribbing and go straight to all flat knitting. And I do 15 rows, and that's that pre-heel where I use a little bit tightened tension. And then I do the heel. I'm going to show the heel in just a second, but that's the heel that gets turned. Once the heel is done, I do the foot. And that's going to vary depending on the size that I'm trying to make, but usually between 60 and 80 rows. Then I do a modified heel for the toe. And that's what that is. You can see the heel is on the bottom, and then I do the toe. And then I'll close the toe on the bottom. Let me show you that on a different sock. So here's a different sock, and it's kind of pink and purples. Again, that toe is up here. And to close it, I use a Kitchener. And so I leave a long tail inside. I pull that out to the outside. And then using a tapestry needle, I will tuck these yellow yarns in. Now that's just a waist yarn. It'll come off of the sock shortly. And then using that long tail, I will Kitchener back and forth across all 64 stitches. And once I get over there, I'll turn it back to the inside and bury my ends. And then the waist yarn comes off. And then I'll have a completed sock other than weaving that end in there. All right, so it's time to start cranking our heel. All these needles that I'm not going to be using are out of work. Make sure that I have my heel spring on, and you'll see why in just a second. And now I can crank forward. Hear that clacking? You didn't hear that before because I had the dime on that little triangular piece. And I'm going to crank until I hear that big click. Now I don't hear anymore. I know it's time to go back. Before I go back, I need to decrease 1 stitch. I decrease by raising another needle up. Now that one won't stitch, so that's going to be a decrease, and I come back. And when I first started on these machines, you really have to watch those needles and make sure that they're catching the yarn. So now I've gone over to this side. I'm going to lift this needle. That's a decrease. And because I have the heel spring on and it's adding that tension, it's taking up that yarn, so I don't have to worry about keeping it taut as I change directions. It does that for me. Now look, I'm seeing my yarn right up, these needles. Right now I can just use my fingers and push that down. If you're not careful, if it rides up too far, you're going to lose your stitches. We'll fix that in just a minute. So again, yeah, I don't like the way it's riding up, so it's time to fix it. All right, okay. So I'm going to put in my heel weights in just a second to keep these knitting from riding up the needles. But take a look, you can tell since these aren't knitting that I'm getting more fabric on this side. And that creates that curve to go around the heel. All right, so here's a heel weight. They're 1 pound weights, so just big giant fishing weights down here. And it's like a fork, and some people do use real forks, and it's been bent up here at the top. And I'm going to put that inside the cylinder and engage that, or kind of catch some sock yarn.
Oh, yeah, I see.
And that keeps some weight, some downward pull. Got to keep that downward pull when you're doing socks on these machines. Or any knitting machine for that matter. And here's my third one. Now, there are other types of weights, but this is what I tend to use. All right, so it's time to start knitting the heel again. You'll see that yarn did not ride up. Now, you have to watch your corners. It'll ride up there before it'll ride up anywhere else. Push that down just to be sure. Okay, I'm on the last 2 rows of the heel. So I have to do my last increase here by pushing this needle down. But I also take the working yarn and wrap it around the last standing needle over here. And that keeps you from getting a hole. It's easier to see here. That way you won't get the hole that sometimes it will develop here. That's not the tightest I've ever done, but you keep a big hole from forming there. Here's a better one on this side. By doing that last wrap, you don't get a big hole there.
So something to look for in hand knit, machine knit, if they're wrapping their
If they're doing a
yarn
wrapper.
at the heel or
Yeah.
not.
At the end, well, yeah, at the end of the heel.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to come over. And we're going to go to the other side and do the same thing. We push the last needle down. Okay, so we've done our 75 rows for the foot. It's time to do the toe. The toe is a kind of modified heel. When I did the heel, I raised the back needles up out of work. This time I'm going to raise the front needles up out of work, and I'm going to work across here. That gets the seam where I do the Kitchenering. It's a different sock. But this is going to be the top of my foot. My Kitchener seam will actually be underneath, right about the place where the toes curl into your foot. So you don't really feel it. And it's not much of a seam. And if I'm doing really good on my Kitchener, there's no seam really at all. Okay, that's the beauty of the Kitchener. It just recreates the knitting. All right, so
And just to be clear, Kitchener is a knitting
technique.
term.
Yeah, it's a knitting term.
technique.
And there's more than one way to do it.
Okay.
Okay, I happen to like using the tapestry needle. Other people use knitting needles. Okay, double pointeds usually. Okay, so I put in my heel weights or heel forks here, because now that I'm knitting more fabric on just this side, I need a little extra tension to keep that knitting being pulled down inside the cylinder. All right. Okay, so I've done my first 10 decreases, 5 on each side. And now I'm going to raise 2 at a time, so that'll be a double decrease right there. And I'll do that 3 times on this side and 3 times on this side. And that creates a more rounded decrease. And that matches up with the shape of the toes better than the heel. The heel's much more angular. So that's what's going on now. The toe is now finished. I've cut off enough of the project yarn to be able to do my Kitchener. So I'm just pulling that out of the yarn carrier, and I'm going to drop it right inside the tube of knitting. That's where that goes now. And now I need to get some waste yarn. Okay, so it's time to put waste yarn on here. Now I need the waste yarn in a contrast color to my project yarn so that it's easier to Kitchener. Okay, so I drop that into my little tub here, and I'm going to thread my yarn mast. So there's my guide hole. It goes under that little tension in the little hole and back, there's another hole at the back. And that keeps my yarn untangled. Now I advance my yarn carrier here to where the needles are in work. And I need to add some yarn. Get down there. This latch is going to get in my way, so I need to move it down. Okay. So now I need to thread my yarn carrier, so that goes through there and down in there. Then I'm going to knit just a couple stitches. Make sure it's working, and it is. I'm going to go just a few more. Now I need to put all of these needles back down into work. And again, I don't want to push them all the way because that'll close my latches. Double check them all. Yep, I can feel points on every one of them. So now I can go around, put my dime in. And there's my yarn, my waste yarn. And right about now I'll stop. And if it's time to take a break, take a break. Otherwise, if I'm going to keep on going, I will put in the ribber and set up to begin the next sock. And so I get a train of socks that way, instead of having to stop and start all the time. All right, so I'm hanging on to the sock down here from underneath, and I want to take it off the machine totally. So my yarn's going to run out. And it's off.
Cool.
I need it like that.